Greetings from Mesa View United Methodist Church of Albuquerque, New Mexico. We hope this message will be meaningful and relevant to your life and your relationship with God. We invite you to join us for worship on Sunday mornings. Our traditional service is at 8:30 a.m. and at 11 a.m. we gather for contemporary worship. More information may be found at our website, mesaviewumc.com. Now may you be blessed through the reading and hearing of God's holy word.
The first epistle reading today comes from Hebrews 12, 1 through 11. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who, for the sake of the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such hostility against himself from sinners, so that you may not grow weary or lose heart. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood, and have forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as children. My child, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, or lose heart when you are punished by him. For the Lord disciplines those whom he loves, and chastises every child who he accepts. Endure trials for the sake of discipline, because God is treating you as children. For what child is there whom a parent does not discipline? If you do not have that discipline in which all children share, then you are illegitimate and not his children. Moreover, we had human parents to discipline us, and we respected them. Should we not be even more willing to be subject to the Father of the spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our own good, in order that we may share his holiness. Now, discipline always seems painful rather than pleasant at the time, but later it yields the peaceful truth of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. The second epistle reading is 1 Corinthians 9, verses 24 through 27. Do you not know that in a race the runners all compete, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win it. Athletes exercise self-control in all things. They do not receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable one. So I do not run aimlessly, nor do I box as though beating the air. But I punish my body and enslave it, so that after proclaiming to others, I myself should not be disqualified. This is the word of God for the people.
Thanks be to God. Tonight, many of the athletes will again gather for the closing ceremonies of the Olympic Games, except for those athletes who have fled the country with the police right on their heels. And at tonight's ceremony, the head of the International Olympic Committee will declare an official end to the Rio Games, and then the flag of Japan will be hoisted over the stadium, and they will recognize next host nation, Japan, taking place in Tokyo, and the race to the next Olympics begins with all the stories of cost overruns, of the inability of the city to host the Olympics, of worries of terrorism as we get closer to it, whether things will be finished on time, the same stories we hear every 4 years. This is really like a relay race that takes place, one nation handing the baton off to the next nation and on to the next nation, hoping that the baton doesn't get dropped in between, or maybe there's some sort of glee that we have. Maybe they will drop the baton and things will go terribly wrong at the next Olympics. But regardless, the athletes and Tokyo are now working hard to prepare for 4 years from now, when we gather again to do this all over. And so today we then conclude our series of looking what we can learn from the Olympic Games for our faith life and how we run the race that is before us. Last week when we talked about wrestling, I said that people who study sports believe it's one of the oldest sports that we as humans do. But I said since walking is an Olympic sport, we have to say that's got to be the earliest sport that we participate in. We've been walking for nearly 4 million years. Running, I think, has to probably be the next oldest sport. Although I think originally running as a race was not to see who could be the fastest, but it was to be merely faster than the slowest person. Because when that leopard or cheetah or lion is chasing you and looking to kill you, you don't have to be the fastest, you just don't have to be the slowest. But at some point we decided we would start racing and see who was indeed the fastest. And then we began giving them prizes for being the fastest in the race. Indeed, the earliest Olympic Games consisted only of foot races. All the other sports that became associated with the Olympics were added later. But much like the modern games, it's really still the athletes of the athletic events, those that take place in the main stadium on the track, that get most of the glory. Certainly worldwide, most of the glory still goes to them. In the ancient Olympics, they didn't just gain local praise, they gained immortal fame. We still talk about some of the athletes of the ancient Olympic Games some 3,000 years ago. And they gained not only fame, but also financial wealth as well. The first true athletic free agents come from the first Olympic Games, probably best identified by Sotates, who appeared one Olympic Games and was a winner representing the island of Crete, and come around the next Olympics was representing the Ephesians, going to whoever was the highest bidder. And so just like today, in the ancient days, there was financial gain to be made if you won at the games. But at the games themselves, there were no financial rewards. The only thing they received was a wreath that was placed on their head. In the Olympics, it was a wreath of olives. At the Isthmian Games outside of Corinth, they placed a wreath of wild celery upon their head. And so when we hear Paul say to the Corinthians to run in such a way not to receive a wreath that is perishable, we should be thinking about them placing this wreath of wild celery on the athlete's head. Because the Isthmian Games outside of Corinth took place every 2 years. So this is an image of the temple of Poseidon, which is where the games took place. All the games were done in honor of the god Poseidon. And so, whenever Paul is writing this letter to the Corinthians, they are at most only 1 year separated from the events of the games. Every 2 years these were happening. And so when we hear him talking about these things, this is not some distant games taking place in Greece for the Olympiad. This is taking place in their backyard. This temple is less than 8 miles from the city of Corinth. And while we have no idea why Paul originally goes to Corinth, there's lots of reasons why Corinth was an important city in the ancient world and why it would have been important for Paul to go there. It's entirely possible that the first time he went to Corinth was to see the Isthmian Games, because he knew that it would draw people from all around the Mediterranean world who were there, and so if he could convict them to become followers of Christ, then he could spread that gospel message more than he could just preaching in Corinth itself. In addition, there were no facilities, no housing or anything for the athletes or anyone else who came to the Isthmian Games. Everybody stayed around the area in tents. And since Paul was a tent maker, he could go there and either manufacture tents or help repair tents and maybe make enough money to be able to support his missionary efforts for another year. I mean, this is all speculation. We don't know. I think it's probably pretty good speculation that these were playing a significant event, not just in the Corinthian community's life, but also in what Paul was doing. And so when Paul says, run the race, run it to win it, this is what he's talking about. And the Corinthian community could also see the way that Paul lived his own life with determined grit and dedication to proclaiming the gospel message. convert more followers to Christ. Now, in the ancient Olympic Games, athletes had to take an oath at the beginning of them, pledging that they had been practicing, preparing for at least 10 months before they showed up. They were preparing to be able to compete, that they were not just showing up on the day of the event and stretching out a little bit and saying, I got this, let's go. You know, there are some people who are incredibly gifted naturally, have extreme athletic talent, like myself. I think I could beat Usain Bolt. But I don't want to show him up, and I don't want the headache of having to travel, so I'm just going to let him do his thing. But Usain Bolt trains and trains and trains and trains to be able to run for less than 10 seconds to be the best. Most of us have to train hard to prepare ourselves to run a race or to do whatever it is that we do, to be our best at it. We can't just show up on the day of and hope that we're going to win. And so Paul is saying, at the very least, that you should try your best to run and win this race, to do everything in your power to be able to be there, to be able to compete. This is not about showing up and hoping to come in seconds, or saying, I was there, isn't that enough? Showing up's 80% of the battle. Because in the Olympic Games, at the Isthmian Games, there was only one award given. There was no second or third place prize. You got one wreath, the winner of the race. That was who won. Everyone else went home with nothing. So Paul's saying, don't show up hoping, say, oh, I was second, and that's good enough. It's not about running aimlessly or just shadow boxing. This is knowing what it will take to reach the finish line and doing everything we can in order to run that race to win it. Which means we have to train and dedicate ourselves in that practice. Now, it said that there's a difference between involvement and commitment. And the difference is the difference between eggs and bacon. When you have eggs, the chicken is involved. When you have bacon, the pig is committed. Paul is telling us, just as Jesus said before, he doesn't want you to be involved, he wants you to be committed. To give your life to be a follower of Christ. To be committed to everything that we have, to give everything that we have in this race of life. Now, there's something of a fallacy about amateur athletics, and we hold up, oh, amateurs, that we want amateur athletics because they're in it for the love of the sports. Those professionals, they just do it for the money, right? That's a fallacy that was created by the European aristocracy, and the British in particular, so that the wealthy white men of privilege who had leisure, who had the time to compete and to give everything they had to be world-class athletes, didn't have to compete with those who had to support families and had to work and didn't have the time to dedicate what it took to be world-class athletes. And so they could run these races. Think of chariots of fire. They're not bricklayers running out there on the beach, remember? These are aristocrats, Oxford students. Because they didn't have to want to compete with people who had to work and couldn't dedicate everything they had to be Olympic athletes. And so we created this fallacy of amateur athletics is so much better than professional athletics. But Paul is saying, stop being an amateur at it. Stop just being involved. Be committed. Become a professional in this thing that we do. To give everything that you have into the discipline required to run this race of faith, to be a follower of Christ, and to run to win. Now, I remember a soccer coach I had who would tell us that we were never going to lose a match because we were outrun in the second half. That we might lose because the other team was just better than we were, but that we were not going to lose because we didn't give the best effort we have. And in the second half, when we were coming close to the end of the game and the other team was sucking wind, we were still going to be going strong. And how do we get to that point? We run, and we run, and we run, and we run, and we run. We run wind sprints until we're gasping for breath and trying to hold down our last meal, until we're collapsing as soon as we cross the line and coach blows the whistle and says, on the line, and we do it all over again. Because that's the only way you're going to be able to compete and say at the end of the second half, I'm not going to be exhausted. I'm going to beat the other team because they have not put in as much work as I have. That's the way it happens. And you have to have somebody who screamed at you to do that, because you're not going to do that yourself. So we have to be running. That's where that line from Hebrews that we heard, that discipline in the moment is painful. You don't want to do it, but in the end it always brings forth the fruits. But Paul adds this one other caveat, and that is he says that when we discipline ourselves, when we're running this race, we should prepare so that in the end we are not disqualified. Now the Greek word that's actually translated there as disqualified is a Greek word referring to athletic events. And so Paul is saying, this is like, don't be disqualified, don't have the false starts. Don't try to pass the baton in a non-baton passing area and get disqualified from winning the bronze medal. Don't take illicit drugs. Something is going to kick you out of the games. You have to do it, and you have to do it the right way. Is Paul telling us as well that we can't be standing on the sidelines trying to be coaches? Coaches are important. You need to have coaches. But what he's saying is you got to be in there running the race. You have to be the athlete. It's showing people how you live as a Christian. Not telling people about Christ. Not walking up and saying, have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior? It's showing people that you've accepted Jesus Christ. And you are living your life differently. You are running the race to win it. And you're running it with perseverance, looking to Jesus, who's already run this race for us. And who's not running side by side with us. He's not setting our pace next to us. He's out there at the end telling us to keep coming, to show up and run to win. Now, one of the things that Leadership Council has just begun to do is that we are all going to make a pledge every Leadership Council meeting about what we are going to be doing the next month to improve our spiritual lives, to take on one of the spiritual disciplines, through prayer, fasting, scripture reading, lots of different things that we could be doing. And then to hold one another accountable. So we're going to say what it is that we're going to do, be as specific as possible. In the next Leadership Council meeting, we're going to go around and say, this is what I pledged to do, and this is how I did. And it's not about guilt or shame. It's saying, I thought I could do this, and it turns out I wasn't very good at it. And either I was successful or no. And then next month, I'm either going to keep doing that and improve, or I need to switch to something else to help me build up my spiritual life. Now, I can't say for anybody else who's on Leadership Council how that's going. I can say for me, this first week since we took this on has not been very good. I made a pledge that we were going to pray as a family once every day. And out of the past week, we've done that 3 times. Now, we should celebrate because 3 is better than 0, but that's still 4 where we didn't get there. And so, just like in any sport, sometimes you start right off the blocks and then you run out of steam later. And sometimes you just don't have the skills, the gifts, the graces to get right off the blocks. It takes you a while to build up into these things. But having this accountability group that I have to now answer to be able to say, I did well or I didn't do so good, is like having to report back to a coach. So I encourage you, if you're going to take something on, don't just do it by yourself. Have somebody that you're going to be accountable to, because when you have to answer to somebody else, it makes a huge difference in actually undertaking the process. But discipline in the short term is hard, but it'll always yield the fruits of righteousness in the long term. Now, no one is truly born an athlete or a runner. They might have natural gifts and talents that they can build up to become world-class athletes, but they have to work at it every day. They have to make a choice. Because they could have the gifts and graces to be Usain Bolt, but never want to actually go out and run, and they'll never be Usain Bolts. They might not even win the high school track meet. They have a choice to make. I'm either going to undertake the effort and the discipline necessary to do that, or not. We too have a choice. No one is born a Christian. It's a choice we have to make. And it's also a choice of how we are going to live our lives. Because you can say, I'm a Christian, and never do anything Christian or to strengthen your faith journey. Or you can say, I'm a Christian and I'm going to run this race before me, and I'm going to run and train to win it. It's a choice. And to make that choice, to say, I'm going to run this race to win it, means that we have to make that the priority in our lives. To put our faith lives front and center. And to put the other things that distract us to the side. And how do we prepare to run that race? First step is simply say, I'm going to do it. It's going to become the priority in my life. And I'm going to stop treating this as something I'm involved in. Instead, say it's something I'm committed to. I'm going to give my life to it. As Paul said, I have decided to know nothing among you except Christ. Everything else is secondary to me knowing Christ among you. Now, in United Methodist Church, our membership vows are we support the congregation with our prayers, our presence, our gifts, our service, and our witness. And I think that's a good place to start, whether you're a member, whether you ever want to be a member or not. That's a good place to start. Prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness. Starting with prayer. Engaging every day in a conversation with God. It's not just about asking God what you need or asking for guidance. It's also about listening. It's about praying for the needs of others. It's about praying for the church and our community and our nation. It's about engaging every day with this person we say that we're in relationship with. Second is presence. That means showing up. Showing up at worship, but it's more than that as well. Because it's also about being present when you show up. Because you can be present and not actually there. It's about presence. It's about deepening your faith life in other ways through daily Bible readings, about engaging in small group activities or Sunday school or other faith development things, so that you have that accountability group. You have people who are acting as coaches for you in your faith life to say, nope, you're not done, get back on the line, let's run it again. It's about gifts. Giving financially, but also giving of ourselves. Using those gifts and graces that God has given to us in service to the church and the community. Helping those who are in need. And finally, it's about spreading the gospel message. Again, not just about telling people, about showing people through the lives that we live, about showing them the race that we are running. Disciplining in our lives in such a way that we are picking up our cross how often? Daily. Remembering the disciplines and running that race that's before us. And while it might not be the funnest thing in the moment sometimes, discipline always produces the fruits of righteousness in the end. And we are called to run this race before us, not just to run it, but to run it to win it. But winning here is not just about one person. It's not that one of us in this room will win and everybody else goes home. We are all running this race to win it for ourselves. Because the goal is not that perishable wreath. That goal is the unperishable prize that we will receive. We might also be reminded not to rest on our laurels. A laurel was the wreath placed around the athletes' heads. So what we've already accomplished in our faith life, great, celebrate it, but you got to move on. You can't rest on that, because that's not running the race. We're not looking back to where we have been, we're looking forward to that finish line, where Jesus is standing, having already completed the race on our behalf. We run with perseverance, and we run not as individuals, but as a body of Christ as well. And we continue looking forward to Christ, the perfecter of the faith, who has promised us this eternal reward. So continue to run the race. Do not run it as if to be disqualified at the end, but instead to win that eternal reward, that imperishable victory that has been promised to us. I pray that it will be so, my brothers and sisters.